for a minute before we begin. Thank you, friends. So tonight we're going to talk, and we're going to have a really interesting conversation that I'm really looking forward to. 20 years after the shock and the grief of September 11th, 2001, the legacy of that day lives on in US policies of perpetual warfare. US presidents continue to use the military force authorizations passed to enable war in Afghanistan and Iraq to justify military action all around the globe. And the Friends Committee on National Legislation and friends around the country have been working to repeal these war authorizations, which I'm sure I know many of you have been involved in, and I'm so glad to see you here. We've been working to end the destruction of endless war and to build peace and justice and healing for those affected by these global conflicts. This summer, the sustained efforts and very persistent advocacy of FCNL's lobbyists in Washington and our advocacy teams all around the country have helped Congress move closer than ever to repealing the 2002 authorization for use of military force, or the 2002 Iraq AUMF, as you might have heard it called. So in tonight's event, we're going to talk with advocates who have been part of this persistent, faithful grassroots movement for peace. I'm going to share a little introduction of our two speakers. Pamela Minden is blessed to have been married for 39 years and to be the parent of a daughter whose commitment to creating a more sustainable, just, and peaceful world inspires her. Pamela credits her partner Dave and longtime membership in the Madison monthly meeting, the part of Northern Yearly Meeting, and the Friends couple enrichment for her marital and parental success. As a retired nurse and educator, Pamela continues to teach about communication, teamwork, and conflict resolution because, as she says, she still has a lot to learn. She joined the Madison, Wisconsin advocacy team at its inception in May 2017, and she's grateful for the way that FCNL and her teammates helped to channel her anger and angst into political action motivated and moved by love. Luke Mayhew works on peace and environmental justice advocacy in Maryland. He attends Homewood Friends Meeting, where he helped launch the Baltimore FCNL advocacy team last year. Luke's experience with FCNL-supported lobby visits helped quickly introduce him to the broader network of anti-war and anti-imperialism activists, including Maryland Peace Action, as well as intersectional project collaborators at the Maryland Poor People's Campaign and the Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility. So I'm really excited for this conversation. These are two people who I admire a lot, and I have the joy of working with them on a regular basis. It's always good to see you both. As you well know, we are at a critical moment where Congress could take a huge step forward in sort of restoring or reclaiming constitutional war authority. This would be the first time that a war authorization is repealed in 50 years since the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. I'm looking forward to talking with you both about your persistence in this ongoing work and advocacy for peace. So I was hoping that we could begin with an initial question, especially at this moment as we're wrapping up the month of September. I know there have been a lot of advocacy teams commemorating both 20 years since 9/11, not just the attack itself, but the endless wars that ensued. So I wonder if we could begin with each of you sharing a little bit about how you or your teams have been marking the anniversary of September 11th and what in general has really motivated you to advocate against endless wars.
Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. This was a big year, the 20th anniversary, and I did want to make sure that advocacy groups that I was a part of were out in the public, making statements on this, directing the pretty volatile narrative that this somehow takes, making sure that we're there with truth and speaking with the action and next steps. So we had an event in DC, a rally that was organized by the DC advocates, part of the FCNL advocacy team. I played a supporting role, and our Baltimore team played a supporting role to make sure that that moved forward. We also teamed up with Common Defense, who has collaborated with FCNL, especially on the national call when Kyle Bibby spoke a few months ago. And then Continue to Serve was a really big asset for that, bringing in a number of people that could speak from their veterans' experience with a critical lens. It was a successful event, I think, partly because of the numbers and partly because the stories were so moving for our group to hear. We would be marking this time as a historical event anyway, because 9/11 event was so shocking and tragic, but it wasn't inevitable that we'd still be immersed in the post 9/11 wars that it brought on. So not only, I mean, we, in the advocacy world, we've looked at other milestones and drawn lessons from it. This year, 50 years of Pentagon Papers, looking at Hiroshima and Nagasaki 76th anniversary in August, and those legacies do continue with us in very real ways. But this one we are so still steeped in, not only being in particular regions militarily, but also having the systems in place to make war happen so smoothly and under the public radar. So, you know, I'm glad we heard ongoing stories from veterans who are still involved, Muslim people still dealing with the consequences of Islamophobia that particularly rose after 9/11. So hearing those stories was important and galvanized me and others to keep working through the month on several other rallies of very related issues with the military industrial complex. So, and then last thing to say is that FCNL, your national office, played a huge supporting role for that, came out in very heartwarming numbers with your and surprised guest Jim Kason's getting Julia's policy update there. We weren't sure who was going to turn out for this, and having you all there was a big support. And then you all focused it back not just on the general stories, but on here's what we do, which is repeal the 2002 AUMFs. So thank you.
I know this is Zoom, but as you were speaking, Luke, my energy picked up. You know, you're just beaming, and it's really wonderful to see that, because I find it pretty hard sometimes to get out and do those active things that you're describing. So thank you for your energy. That's really helpful to me right now. Thank you, Sarah, and everybody at FCNL for your relentless work for peace, for creating the advocacy teams, and for letting me speak about being part of one. Being involved with FCNL in these really turbulent times keeps me from just rolling up in a blanket, watching romantic comedies, and eating a lot of popcorn with excessive butter, salt, and brewer's yeast. That's what I'm really motivated to do. Thank you also, Sarah, for questioning how I've been marking the 9/11 anniversary, because before you asked, I hadn't marked it. Endless war is numbing. And your question is a really good reminder to me of the myth of redemptive violence. It has to be actively resisted. Theologian Walter Wink wrote extensively about how this ancient narrative that violence is ultimately necessary and just permeates human consciousness and culture. As a nurse, I worked in mental health and specialized in treating trauma. I provided care for combat veterans, for sexually abused kids, and then ran a rape crisis center. Trauma renders not only physical and mental wounds, but also moral injury. so too can indirect exposure to catastrophic events in others' lives. Sarah, your question put me in touch with some of the anger, the grief, the vicarious post-traumatic stress symptoms, and the compassion fatigue that ultimately had me leave direct nursing care. I went back to school hoping a PhD would equip me to address an ever-growing epidemic of violence in a more preventive and system-level way. It led me to teaching. And the last decade of my career was spent educating staff within the Veterans Administration healthcare system. Now I want to tweak the latter part of Sarah's question. What motivates, I'm going to make this instead, what motivates me to advocate for, I'm tweaking it to say what motivates me to advocate for peace rather than against war. Wired for survival, the human brain operates on a negative feedback loop. That predisposes us to see problems far more readily than possibilities. In neuroscientific language, what fires together wires together, and you get more of what you focus on. Probably most of you know Representative Barbara Lee. She's a hero. Right after the 9/11 attacks, she was the sole member of Congress to vote against invading Afghanistan. She knew that granting such broad power to the president would lead to perpetual war. In the New York Times, just a few weeks ago, she said that she voted no, not because she was a pacifist, but because her experience as a psychiatric social worker had taught the importance of not making decisions in the heat of emotion. I'm grateful every day for her presence in Congress. When emotions escalate uncomfortably, they trigger a stress response, which moves mental functioning to the brainstem, and it limits us to freezing, fleeing, or fighting. If, however, rising discomfort is recognized and used as a signal to inhale deeply, activate the brain's frontal cortex up here, and do the creative thinking needed to address challenges productively. Barbara Lee's courage motivates my peace advocacy, but fear is a bigger driver. I'm terrified that if humans don't soon learn how to recognize when their feelings are hot, especially fear, anger, and hurt, and to count to 10 before acting on them, our days are numbered. Being part of an advocacy team immunizes me against the paralysis that fear evokes.
Thank you, Pam. And thanks to you both. One of the things that I love about having both of you as speakers for this is that your experience with the teams and some of your background and the way that you talk about the work is in some ways so different and so powerful. So I think, I know that Luke and I live in Baltimore together, in the same city. And so we talk a lot about rallies and collecting with, different kinds of collaborators and coalition building. And when I hear Pam talk about this work, it's such a deep reflective practice for all of you. And so I just really appreciate you both sharing the ways that you come into this work and some of what motivates you just to engage in this kind of advocacy to begin with. The next question I wanted to ask you both is, the advocacy teams and FCNL's approach to lobbying is a really particular model. This deep relational advocacy is the core practice of the advocacy team's work in Congress. And I wonder if you could share a story or an experience or a reflection that illustrates how this practice of relationship building as the core of our advocacy, how this has been present in your work, how this has transformed some of your relationships and strengthened your work as advocates.
Oh, I love the notion of deep relational advocacy. What a motivating way to frame lobbying. Aside from voting and occasionally writing or marching for social reform, I was politically latent until Donald Trump assumed, or more correctly, consumed the presidency. I didn't feel knowledgeable or savvy enough to make any difference in how government operates. Watching the bully pulpit become a license to bullying awakened in me my responsibility for the mess our world is in. I don't blame myself for it, but I do have some obligation and ability to respond to it. I think of responsibility as response, ability, or the ability to respond. I have formally studied human behavior, and I continue to read current, relevant, and evidence-based research. Far more instructive, though, is actually paying attention when I interact with people, really tuning into what they say and do, noticing how they react to what I say and do, and working hard to use their reactions to correct my continuous bungling. When I advocate against war, especially with people who have fought in one, the responses I get tend to be irritation or justification. Given that the brain's deficit orientation comes with a default setting of defensiveness, that's understandable. When I advocate for peace, I notice others are more open to conversation. For 25 years, my husband, Dave, who was on the Madison Advocacy Team with me, he and I have been part of Friends Couple Enrichment. This Quaker organization teaches couples how to deepen and enhance their relationships through a spiritual practice of dialogue, the core of which is deep listening. Deep listening goes beyond what is said to what is longing to be expressed. It's predicated on presence, which requires tuning out external distractions and turning off internal chatter. It is impossible to listen when lost in memory or formulating a reply. You literally have to be here to hear. FCE's motto is peace begins at home. Ultimately, peace begins with me, the person I have the most control over. Short of imposing physical, mental, or social constraints or coercion, I can't make others change. When I change, though, it's amazing how often others follow suit. My challenge is to stop trying to fix others and to focus on how I can improve. I need to practice what I preach more. At the VA, I got to focus on the skills that underpin effective communication, teamwork, and conflict resolution by teaching them to my colleagues. Miraculously, the VA, part of the military industrial complex, paid me to coach my coworkers to breathe more deeply, slowly, regularly, and quietly. This skill catalyzes all the other ones needed to build the kind of relationships required for peacemaking. It helps to re-engage the frontal cortex when we get overwhelmed by all the crazy stuff we humans say and do. Emotions are contagious, especially negativity. Being around positive people and setting firm limits on those who express their dismay in hateful language or actions is prophylactic. For a lot of people, like me, positivity takes intentionality and effort. Bad experiences taint good ones more than good experiences purify bad ones. Research evidences that accentuating the good ones, though, reinforces happiness and resilience. Studies of married couples show that those whose positive interactions outweigh negative ones by a ratio of 5-to-1 work more easily through conflict and are more likely to stay together. So I teach that the brain is malleable, a property called neuroplasticity. Our neural structure changes across the lifespan for the good as well as the bad, and in response not only to our experiences, but also our thoughts. That knowledge motivates me to intentionally think more positively and to focus on peace.
I'm actually learning a lot about sort of that peace neurology here. I haven't heard that before. So, Pamela, I hope we keep in touch so I can see some of this information that you're sharing. And it speaks to me. I personally have some lessons to learn about focusing more on the positive. I think I have a lot of positive things that I love. Sometimes when it comes to advocacy, especially looking at worldwide imperialism, I do focus on the negative. I think there's, in some senses, a very big reason for that, especially for people more impacted than I am to sort of have to deal with that negative, boot that is sometimes crushing on them in other countries. So, I'm weighing the negative with the positive. As far as and I should also add that Pamela brings a humbleness about her work and wanting to do more. I was talking about all the organizing I've done. I'm very new to this scene. I was happy to be so alert, and I've been with FCNL with their advocacy team for a year. So I'm new on this, and I did get a phone blast from the past message on 9/11 from last year, and I was taking very unrelated selfies that would be very embarrassing to share. So this was a year for me to get more concentrated. I have been focusing on relationship building. Often what FCNL is focusing on when they say that is building that relationship with your congressional member. I think I focus more on what comes before that, which is building relationship with our team, which they are my team, but they are new people to me. So they have certainly rubbed off on me their passion and their urgency on these issues. We have a psychologist that has worked with veterans, that continues to work with veterans. We have a veteran himself who was not happy with some of the austerity of the military that did not treat him in a way that values soldiers, and then him having a teacher as a significant other who sees the trade-off problems of not having enough books for the kids, while he saw huge submarines that he was operating that had lots of money behind it. So he's seen those discrepancies. Importantly, we have someone who living in Baltimore. She was living in an impacted community in 2015 during the Freddie Gray protests after the police brutality that ended the life of Freddie Gray. She was living in a neighborhood where that was militarily occupied. She hears us talking about military occupation in other countries. She had experienced it firsthand, and that led her to really have empathy for the people in other countries. And she was very interested in working on those foreign policy issues, because she saw the systemic ways that they are all connected. We also have lifelong peace advocates that are part of our group. So I've learned a lot from them and been well connected that way. And then also, before I talk about building relationships with congressional members, we've been building relationships with our joint lobbying friends. So they're not part of our team, but we want to show that this is not just peace advocates. This is people who focus on poverty issues, on police brutality issues. So we've joined forces with Maryland Poor People's Campaign, with our other advocacy teams in Maryland. That's important too. With Maryland Association of Teachers, I think I have that name wrong, but educators, and with Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility. So different groups, and there are more who they add to the meeting, they add to what are the congressional staffers here. They also are able to take it back to their own meetings. They've allowed me to do reports on militarism to them, even if it's not their central issue. So those relationships, I think will only continue to build as we work in conjunction. I think as far as building relationships with the congressional staff, we do have congressional staffers who have been supportive of the AUMFs from pretty early on. Most of all of Maryland, not just in my district, most of our representatives have co-sponsored the AUMFs, all of the Democratic ones and all the Democrat Party ones. And then our senators have been supportive. They haven't, Senator Van Hollen, we just met with today, unclear why he didn't co-sponsor, but he has made statements with the Senate Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee. So we haven't had an uphill battle with the AUMF issue. There are other issues that I think Peace Action is looking for more movement on, cutting back the national defense appropriations. But we want to do more on building those relationships, but they are starting to know us. They know our teams today. When we had the call with Senator Van Hollen's staff, they said that the reputation preceded us, and he had not met with FCNL before. We tried to make clear that we're the volunteer team. I wasn't sure, maybe he had the wrong impression, but he said, I heard a lot from Senator Van Hollen, from his superiors and from people who had been in the office that said, I should really listen on this meeting. I think he should really listen to all of his constituents, not especially us, but it's great that he knew to take us seriously and that we had put a lot of thought into our message.
Well, thank you so much, Luke. And thanks to you both for these really thoughtful responses. I'm always learning in this work, and I think I'm learning even from the fact that, this is not just relational advocacy as in relationship with your member of Congress, which is usually how I think of it, but you both have really expanded in this really powerful way that definition, relationships with coalition partners, relationships with others in your community that you bring into the work, relationship building as a practice within yourself, sort of how am I not just changing others, but I'm working on, changing myself, as Pam shared. My next question is specifically about the Quaker aspect of this work. I know you both come into this a little differently. Your teams are a little different in terms of how they come into the Quaker approach to advocacy. But I wonder if you could each speak just for a few minutes about what you have found valuable in approaching this advocacy work, either as a Quaker or from a Quaker perspective or through Quaker values.
Boy, to start, approaching this from a relationship with the Quaker organization, FCNL, is just invaluable, because I'm listening to Luke, and I heard you say, Luke, that you wanted to talk with me about some of what I said. And I said, you bet, provided you coach me in how to get the diversity on my team that you have. Holy cow. We are a rather gray group, cheerful, but gray. And we would love to make the kinds of extended and extensive connections that you have. Pessimistic as I can sometimes sound, I have an abiding faith that there is that of God, or the good, in all being. I aspire, I'm working on it, I aspire to live out the Quaker belief that peace is the way. Equality is not optional, and simple living is essential to achieving both. Quaker processes for corporate discernment and decision-making provide good lobbying guidance. My friends in Madison Monthly Meeting and Northern Yearly Meeting know me as a meeting for business junkie. I love it. I resonate with the wisdom of one of my advocacy teammates who distills the essence of Quakerism to shut up and listen. My team has a practice of centering in silence before each lobby visit and reminding ourselves to make ample space to hear our legislators' truths. The Quakers I know that Quakerism and Quakers are imperfect. I like how open they are to ways of seeing and being unlike their own. My advocacy team includes non-Quakers. All of us think a bit differently and are differently abled. I will add as well that several of our members are veterans from the Vietnam War, and their voices give us far more credibility as we advocate for peace. The long tradition of Quaker advocacy and activism helps my efforts to walk my talk with more integrity. FCNL's 78 years of lobbying for peace and all the relationships and knowledge that have and continue to emerge from it give me hope. Had it not been for the clear expectations, ready access to information and experts, and practical lobbying model FCNL provides, I would have bailed. I love how the lobby visit roadmap in quintessentially Quaker fashion has us raise up what we appreciate about our legislators and where we have unity. Having Mark Pocan as our representative makes that pretty darn easy. He regularly meets with us and offers town halls. His district director in Madison is incredibly responsive and just darn cool. Because Mark continually does what we ask and more, we decided to forego asking anything in our most recent lobby visit. Instead, we spent our time expressing gratitude for his latest accomplishments, like joining Barbara Lee in creating and co-chairing the House Defense Spending Reduction Caucus, and introducing the COVID Defense Act, which would direct just over 1% of Pentagon spending towards vaccinating 30% of the world's poorest populations. In the end, we did make a request that he and his staff take time for themselves and their families. It feels Quakerly to not only tell our legislators what to do, but to also help them do it and to applaud their good efforts.
I think for our team, we have a lot of Quaker influence. We're not all Quakers on the team, but I think a feature of even the people who are very influenced by their Quaker spirituality and practices, a feature of it is that it's not readily apparent. And I think that comes from that sense of being non-proselytizing. So, we don't, if we have new members that come on, it's not quite apparent that we're working from, we're inspired by certain testimony or Quaker queries, but I think we are. It's good, it's good to know that that people can join from the Baltimore or outside of Baltimore community, because these issues are so, even though sometimes we don't see everyone mobilizing, and I think these issues are very popular with people. As far as the people who are inspired by it, even if they don't say it, I think it adds a level of trust, I would say, between me and the others that they have, whether in meeting for worship or just during, because I see some of them at meeting for worship and they attend another friends meeting in Baltimore, whether at meeting for worship or just as part of their lifestyle, I trust that they have sat and thought about these issues deeply and empathetically, compassionately, that they have thought about people that we don't directly see, people in other countries heavily impacted by our decisions. I trust that they have had space to put these people in the light, in their version of the light, or in the light that we're all holding dear in our meetings. I trust that our team has done that. Even the members who are not Quaker, you can tell that they've joined in on that sense of somberness, but urgency on the issues that we bring in for the activism side. As I think people think deeply about the issues, I think they are able to make more connections. So it becomes more systemic. And I haven't talked too much in Quaker venues like this, so I don't know if people are tired of hearing the John Woolman quote, about connecting, looking at your wealth and your down to your furniture and your clothes, and seeing the seeds and connections of war. And it takes some deep thought to be able to make those connections, and it takes some deep personal scrutiny to see that too, and even scrutinizing your community and where you're getting those resources from. But making those connections, I think, is very much part of our current situation, not just in the Quaker world, but a lot of our intellectual and advocacy lenses are pointing more to that larger system. But it's helpful for me to see that Quakers have been looking at that for a long time, looking at the connections between poverty and empire, looking at the ways in which our military overseas and our police here at home are protecting certain systems of wealth and certain corporations and certain people of elite privilege. So I like being able to dig into the history of Quaker testimonies and the literature. I would love to. We have not been working in silence into our meetings, and I really want to do that. I think part of it has been the non-proselytizing and letting people not be too intimidated, but I don't think that would be. I think that even, I was caught up in traffic getting back here, and I was so thankful to have that moment of silence, not just for spiritual reasons, but a long day takes some resetting. So I'd like to work in more of that, more bring in some of those Quaker bearings to keep us moving and connected.
Thank you both so much. We don't have any audience questions yet in the chat, so I'm going to take the initiative to ask my last question. I could ask you both many questions for a long time, but since we're limited in time, one of the things that I hear this kind of come through some of what you're sharing, and I've also hear advocacy team members share this a lot, but this work is, although it's very powerful, it can be very inspiring. It's also really hard. And I know that you both know that and have spoken to that. Other people who are part of advocacy teams who are here tonight, I'm sure can speak to that. And I wonder if each of you could speak to something that you find challenging about peace advocacy right now. As others in the audience are thinking about their questions, I would love to hear you reflect on that a little bit.
I think I've done some work to connect with more people in other groups. That's the way we're headed. It's still very hard. I think if you got in conversation with a lot of people, they would feel similarly. We saw on 9/11, we did see an outpouring of people who were sick and tired of endless wars. Of course, if we think way back to going into Iraq, some of the largest anti-war protests in history across the world. But a lot of the people against it that are able to put work into this, have privileges of time and comfortability and don't have, are able to juggle this with their other job, or maybe retired, or maybe a student. But I think there's a lot of power in some of those groups that have been harder to represent and harder to bring into the conversation. Part of it sometimes is just the way getting lobby visits is. You get it during the workday. We had people on our team who are really, they have kids, they're doing their job, they're not completely, they depend on their job. And they took off work for their visit, and that was amazing and inspiring. But not everybody can do that. So finding ways to make our meetings, sometimes more efficient, to provide opportunities, and they might not be through organizing, they might be through arts and music, finding ways that people can be able to work, get to this platform and speak, and also just getting those stories on board. We have a few people who are able to tell really moving stories about how they're impacted by these issues, but definitely there are some perspectives missing. Thinking particularly of Black and brown people of color, Indigenous folks, are not often represented, even though that makes up the global majority that in many of these countries are the ones bearing the impacts of our wars. So, and then also reaching out. I know we're working with our US government, and we want people that are their constituency, but it would be good to make some of those cross-border connections, at least to have conversations, not necessarily bring to our lobby visits, but for us to be hearing those voices. And there are groups doing that. I've heard perspective of women in Afghanistan through peace action, and heard a lot of Palestinian voices speaking out earlier this year. So I am hearing more of those as I stay in touch, but I want to see if there's ways that our small FCNL team can be accessing those voices together.
I just heard, Luke, in what you were saying, a little bit of the advantage of being a senior group. Many of us don't have the same kinds of stressors that you do. So it does make it a little bit easier to focus on this work. I struggle with trying to figure out my part in creating the occasion for war, which I think you did a nice job of addressing as a key question we have to deal with. And I struggle with what is my part in taking away the occasion for war. I also struggle with where to focus my attention, my responsibility. It's so very hard, though. This is the hardest thing for me, to not succumb to the grand, collective, unconscious, culturally reinforced delusion that violence is redemptive. Years of working in the mental health field taught me how to effectively intervene with people whose biochemical imbalances created delusional thinking. A delusion is a fixed false belief that doesn't respond to logical reasoning. Rather than arguing with their thinking, I would empathize with the feelings that tend to accompany delusions: fear, anxiety, frustration. I find it hard to empathize with people whose aberrant thinking and behavior is rooted not in mental pathology, but moral deficiency. I think that in looking for the good, the light in others, it's crucial to not overlook evil. There is a point when it is appropriate and necessary to set boundaries, firm boundaries, on what is and isn't acceptable behavior. Witnessing so much preventable suffering perpetrated by so many people who are so thoroughly corrupted by power fills me with fury. It's hard to have compassion for them and to not respond to their meanness in kind. It's hard to take a higher road and use all the unwanted, unacceptable stuff I see in them as an opportunity to work on the ugly stuff in me. Peace advocacy would be a lot easier if the fruits of our labor were more apparent. I haven't seen any positive difference come from trying to connect with our Tea Party senator. He's a key perpetrator of the big lie and other equally dangerous ones. He doesn't do town halls or respond to our overtures. I can't seem to find anything genuine to thank him for. However, for the last 4 years, the Madison Advocacy Team has met quarterly with the senator's local legislative aide. I like him. He's well informed, he listens, and he treats us with respect. He seems to agree with some of our ideas. When pessimism has me see him as a mere fence to the senator, I like to remember something that happened early in our relationship. One of our team members invited a colleague, a renowned expert on the dangers of nuclear weapons, to join us on a visit. We coached him in advance on FCNL's approach to lobbying, reinforcing that relationship building was our primary purpose. The expert was attentive, but silent until the end, when he succinctly laid out the sequence of events that would follow even a limited nuclear strike. It was horrific. Afterward, our team got to debrief with the expert. I was skeptical that the dire picture he painted, if it got shared with the senator, would sway him for the good. Disheartened, I asked the expert what he thought of the meeting. After a long pause, he said, I had given up on talking with Republicans about nuclear weapons because it was such a waste of time. After watching you all today, I'm reconsidering that. It is possible I won't get to see further evidence of what difference my efforts toward peace make. So for now, I'm trying to focus on John Woolman, to focus on his counsel, to look less at the effects of my labor than the pure motion and reality of the concern as it arises from heavenly love. That is, to let myself be moved by love.
Thank you both. We have now a number of audience questions and less time than I would wish for us to have, so we could ask all of them. But I wanted to share the first question that came through, which is from Dave. Dave said, we're marking 20 years of war. If we manage to do this advocacy work for 20 more years going forward, what do you imagine will keep you active and inspired in that work? So undoubtedly, we'll change legislators, we'll have more conflict, we'll see other changes in the world. What will keep you grounded and working continuously for peace?
I think I'm going first. Dave is sitting right next to me. And I have this running joke in my head that every time we're on a national call, Dave always gets picked. His question always gets picked. So I was just waiting for that to happen. So I hear the question. I'm going to respond to a question that Sarah was going to ask me that's related, because it was about what would I say to someone who's listening right now who feels intimidated or discouraged about doing this work. So you're nodding. Is that kind of the gist of what you're asking? Thank you. I'm going to go with it. So what I would say to such a person who's feeling not up to doing the work because they don't feel capable of asking their senator, I would say, who are you not to request a meeting with your senator? As a guru, author, and failed 2020 presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson wrote, "You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world." It is our constitutional right to let our legislators know what we want them to do. We elected them, they represent all of us, whether they like our views or not. All freedoms, all rights have associated responsibilities if you want to keep them. If you want to live in a democracy, you have to believe in democracy. You have to believe it's possible, and you have to participate in making it happen, even though it feels impossible. Peace advocacy is hard work. Ongoing military action around the world and escalating domestic terrorism still makes me want to just roll up in a blanket, watch romantic comedies, and eat popcorn with a ton of butter, salt, and brewer's yeast. Blessedly, I'm surrounded by people of integrity like Dave, who's sitting right next to me, and my daughter Molly, who is watching, and so many of my teammates. I see them. I'm surrounded by them, and their love and support motivates me to get back to work. So thank you again, FCNL, for giving us these practical ways of responding to overwhelming things. I do have a little bit more that I want to say at the end, but I don't know, Sarah, if you're going to want us to give Luke a chance or.
Well, let's hear from Luke, and then we'll have a few closing thoughts before I hand it back to wrap up for the evening. Luke, go ahead.
Yeah, 20 years going forward, that's very dizzying to think about, because I do have a habit of smiling when I'm worried, or so hopefully I see myself smiling back, but I'm gonna say, like, with the devastation that's already started from climate change and the displaced people from our wars and climate, this work is certainly going to be there and get larger or get categorically different. So I will certainly have things to be working on. How can I stay positive working on that? I personally, I don't need, if I have a lot to do, I don't need a whole lot of hope. I do think there is hope there, but I have these tasks in front of me, and I'm going to keep working on it and improving my own skills and making connections with my team. I mean, I guess I should mention that even just the work, even though it can be grave and urgent, meeting people through the FCNL team has been great. We're on a friendly basis, and I'll be, as things get safer and the pandemic, crossing fingers, we're hopefully able to see each other more. It's hard to say fun, but it's fun. I like that. It's like we have a team sport thing going on, especially, meeting the DC advocates and meeting some of the DC folk was a lot of fun. And I hope to be back there, and for other states to maybe convene in DC and do that. So I have a bit of I'm an introvert, but there's a bit of a social aspect to this that keeps me going, and that's just people being committed and people being fun along the way. But as far as wins, we did work on the state legislature this year, switching gears to issues of police accountability and justice reform in Maryland. We did see some victories there. Not everything we wanted, but a lot of people were geared up to make sure that things passed in the wake of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. So we saw things pass. In the environmental world, we're seeing more composting go through and more resources for wind, and some smarter thinking about solar energy and that sort of thing. So there are some wins going on. I also kind of have a conservative notion that shouldn't let it go too far, because it can lead to stasis, but I don't think it does that with me. But just, you look at things that are appalling. So it's going to be hard to say this, but you see things appalling. Like this year, I'm sure people are keeping up with the NDAA, the money that we'll allot to the military, and it's just abominable how much Biden proposed on top of the Trump administration's, what they had set aside for the military, proposed $13 billion more, making it $753 billion. And we were already sweating that. And then you have Congress come in both chambers and put about another 25 billion more, which I'm new to this work, so that surprised me, and maybe it didn't surprise a lot of people. But we just thought maybe we'd hit the limit with Trump's thinking and wanting to just put more resources there. But it's not. But the conservative thing I say is that if people say, "Oh, we never make progress on this," and my thing is just, well, you don't know how bad it could have been. even though we're seeing that appalling number, maybe we would have kept something like the overseas contingency operations budget. That's gone. And I don't want to celebrate that too much, but you know, that was millions of dollars that we saved. I mean, over the years, that was billions of dollars. So, and we could have seen that number go high up. So it is tautological. I can look at anything and say it could have been worse and feel like we made progress, but I do think it's true. And that's from the experience of doing these lobby visits and talking from the congressional staffers, really feel like we are informing them sometimes. Like sometimes I'm not very bright on these issues, but sometimes the staffers, I'll say this meanly, sometimes their ignorance is inspiring. It's like, I assume they're going to know way more. And then when we teach them something, I'm like, oh, we provided a service here. So I'm glad to at least be letting, you know, the team educate and that sort of thing. So that gives me hope to feel like the work's paying off, even though it's hard to see.
Thank you, Luke. And thank you both so much. I'm full of energy listening to you. I want to give Bobby the last 2 minutes to wrap up, but just Pam, I thought I would just leave, if you have, you know, one final sentence that you wanted to share with us before I hand it back to him. I just wanted to leave that space.
Thank you for doing that. I don't know if I can cram it into a sentence, but I want to say I'm marking another 20-year anniversary. 2 decades ago, the Dalai Lama challenged neuroscientists Richie Davidson and Dan Goleman to shift the focus of their field, psychology, from pathology to positivity. They and hundreds of others are demonstrating that meditation actually can promote health, change all kinds of things, and really increase empathy, compassion, happiness, and it all comes down to breathing more deeply, slowly, regularly, and quietly. And the rule of thumb is, what gets practiced gets improved. So thank you to all of you who are practicing peace.
Thank you. What a great way to end. Thank you so much to both of you. We could do this all night, but I want to give the last couple minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute to Bobby to wrap us up for the evening. And thank you both so much for being here and for sharing your experiences. Right, Bobby.
I'm a little guilty to take the mic back. I want to keep this event going as well. Your stories have just been so fabulous this evening and so inspiring. One thing I do want to call everyone's attention to is the connections between militarism and foreign policy and in the US that were raised tonight. It really connects well with a new report we recently released at FCNL with coalition partners called the Dismantling Racism and Militism in Foreign Policy Project. And I'll put a link in the chat where you can read that report, download it. We have discussion questions that you can share with your community. But that report really lays out a lot of what this long-term focus that Pamela and Luke have talked about tonight for really transforming the US role in the world, calling on an approach that centers equality, justice, shared wealth, and sustainability. You know, the report points us towards a world that doesn't exist yet, even as we sense a call to bring it into being together. So we hope that you'll be a part, you'll download that report and learn about some of those intersections. And I also would encourage you, if you aren't already a part of the advocacy team program, like Luke and Pamela, to visit this link and learn a little bit more about it. Perhaps even think about joining a team in your area or starting one up to be a part of this grassroots sustained movement for peace. Just one final thought here. I will let you all know that our registration for our next Quaker Changemaker event is open. We're calling this one Grounded in Community, Organizing for Environmental Justice on October 7th. And I'll drop a link to the registration page in the chat there. We hope that you'll register and join us for that one. It'll be with our advocacy core organizers working all across the country to advance environmental justice. And with that, I will say thank you so much to everyone and good night. This was a fabulous conversation. Go well, be well, know you are beloved, and we'll see you next time.